You ever step into what you think is your dream home, only to realize you've actually moved into the filming location for a psychological thriller? Yeah, that was me, Jake Henderson, proud new condo owner, armed with a toolbox I barely knew how to use and dreams of peaceful suburban bliss. I'm 28. I read contracts before signing them, and I thought I was being clever when I bought my first property in Willowbrook Gardens. The place looked like it had been curated by Pinterest itself. Neatly trimmed hedges, identical pastel mailboxes, a community park where even the birds seemed to chirp on cue. Great investment, my realtor had chirped, practically vibrating with glee. Such a wonderful, safe, tight-knit community. What she failed to mention was that the neighborhood came with an HOA president named Linda Prescott, who ran this pastel-painted prison like a middle manager with a god complex and a clipboard instead of a conscience. I should have known I was doomed the moment I saw her. Linda, 55, power walking toward me with the ferocity of a woman whose morning coffee came with a side of control issues. She had this smile, tight, manufactured, and stretched across her face like someone had stapled it there during a seminar on passive aggression. "Welcome to Willowbrook Gardens," she announced, as if I'd just crossed into some gated utopia where freedom went to die. "I'm Linda Prescott, your HOA president," she said, and I swear her badge shimmered like a holy relic in the morning sun. I just wanted to go over a few guidelines. Now, when normal people say guidelines, they mean some helpful suggestions. When Linda said it, she sounded like a medieval inquisitor laying out the rules of a new regime. She handed me a packet that was less welcome brochure and more encyclopedia bureaucratica. I'm not exaggerating. This thing had its own table of contents, index, and a glossary of forbidden sins. Community standards, Linda said with the authority of someone who once tried to get her neighbor evicted for owning a flamingo lawn ornament. I skimmed a few highlights. Garbage cans must be removed within 2 hours of pickup. No modifications to exterior without pre-approval. All seasonal decorations require board consent. Who needs Santa when you've got Linda and a rubber stamp? This seems comprehensive, I said, holding back a laugh and a scream simultaneously. Linda's smile grew, and her voice dipped into condescension like it was her default setting. "We take great pride in maintaining our property values and community harmony. I'm sure you'll do your part." Translation: I hope you enjoy filling out paperwork for permission to sneeze. The real fun began the next morning. There she was again, same power suit, same death grip on that clipboard, as I struggled to carry a box of cookware inside. She didn't offer to help. She just observed, watching, scanning, like a hawk that had once worked in HR. "You may want to be careful about leaving your bike on the patio," she said, glancing down at the innocent two-wheeler I'd temporarily leaned against the wall. "We wouldn't want to violate Section 4.7.b, now would we?" Section what now? At the time, I brushed it off as standard neighborly weirdness. But Linda wasn't weird. Linda was a one-woman HOA enforcement squad, and she'd apparently decided my condo was the front line in her war against unsightly behavior. Exactly 2 weeks in, I got my first violation notice. $50 fine. My crime: leaving my bike on my patio for 30 minutes after returning from work. Apparently, that made me an anarchist in Linda's eyes. I wish I was joking about the tone of the letter. It read like it had been ghostwritten by a disappointed Victorian schoolteacher. Violation of Community Aesthetics Code 4.7.b. Unsightly outdoor recreational equipment left visible to common areas. This behavior is not consistent with the standards of Willowbrook Gardens. I stared at the notice, then at my patio, then back at the notice like I was caught in some Kafkaesque episode of HGTV. Linda had photos attached. Yes, she'd snapped actual photos of my patio, presumably from a distance with the zoom set to stalker mode. That was the moment I understood I wasn't dealing with a rational neighbor. I was dealing with a woman who thought her clipboard was a scepter and the HOA rules were gospel. And I had just become her newest target. Linda was everywhere. If I sneezed on the front porch, I half expected to get fined for public biological emissions. I started seeing her patrol the complex like some suburban security guard. I'd catch her peering out from behind her lace curtains at 7:45 a.m. sharp. always scribbling into her notepad like she was writing a dissertation on my morning routine. I'd gone from proud new homeowner to suspicious civilian under the watchful eye of the clipboard queen. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just ignore her? Or comply to avoid drama? Because here's the thing. I don't mind rules. I mind tyranny disguised as community management. And the more I realized Linda was twisting and inventing rules to feed her power trip, the more I knew. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor issue. This was a systemic problem in pastel clothing. And if Linda wanted a war? Oh honey, she'd picked the wrong millennial to micromanage. If I thought the $50 bike fine was a one-off, I was living in a Disney-level fantasy. That was just Linda dipping her toe into the waters of petty tyranny. What followed next was a flood of absurdity that could only be described as Kafka meets home and garden. It started with a second violation notice. This time, it was for a wind chime. A tiny, delicate, bamboo wind chime my sister gave me. It made the faintest, most peaceful sound, like a Buddhist monk sighing after yoga. Violation: unauthorized decorative item that emits sound, she wrote, citing section 3.2, which, spoiler alert, doesn't even exist. Another $50 fine. At this point, I was half expecting the next notice to be for excessive joy. Now, I'm not the kind of person who starts fights over lawn decor, but the weaponized rulebook was starting to feel like Linda's personal extension of martial law. So, I did what any rational, slightly obsessive person with a grudge and highlighter pens would do. I read the entire HOA manual. Twice. Guess what? That sacred tome of HOA gospel Linda loved to swing around like Thor's hammer? It was more toothless than threatening. No mention of wind chimes. No clause banning bikes. Half the infractions she cited were as fictional as her sense of humility. So, I emailed the management company. Requested official copies of our HOA rules. Turns out the real documents were barely 10 pages and read like they'd been drafted during a particularly sleepy committee meeting. Nothing about noise-generating decor. Nothing about exact patio arrangements. Nada. Armed with the truth, I penned the most polite, fact-laden, legally referenced kindly go pound sand letter you've ever seen. I attached copies of the actual rules, highlighted the relevant sections, and gently suggested that issuing fines for non-existent violations could, technically, be considered fraud. 3 days later, at 7 a.m. sharp on a Saturday morning, because why not ruin a perfectly good weekend, there was a knock on my door. Correction, there was a righteous, furious, vengeful pounding on my door. I opened it, bleary-eyed in plaid pajamas and holding a mug that said, "Don't speak." Linda stood there, clipboard clutched like a crucifix, her lips pressed into a line that looked physically painful. "Mr. Henderson," she began, and I could tell from her tone that she had mentally demoted me from neighbor to public enemy number one. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about how things work here." "Oh, I think I understand perfectly," I said, sipping coffee and mentally preparing for battle. Linda's nostrils flared. "I am the president of this HOA. I have the authority to interpret and enforce our standards." "Sure," I replied, "but you don't have the authority to invent new standards. There's a difference between enforcement and fiction writing." Her eye twitched. I'm not even exaggerating. Her left eye did a full-on tic-tac-toe game across her face. "Young man," she hissed like a snake in a turtleneck, "I have been maintaining the order of this community for 8 years. I will not have some entitled millennial come in here and turn this place into a circus." The entitled millennial comment was cute. I made a mental note to put it on a t-shirt. "I'm just asking that we follow the actual rules," I said with an innocent smile. "That's all. Shouldn't be controversial." Linda leaned in, and the scent of her overpowering perfume hit me like a floral smoke bomb. "I will be watching you very carefully from now on. Every single thing you do will be documented. If you want to play games with me, Mr. Henderson, you'd better know the rules." She spun around with the drama of a Shakespearean villain and stalked off, heels clicking like a metronome counting down to destruction. I closed the door, took a sip of my now cold coffee, and realized I was no longer a new homeowner. I was now a combatant in a suburban Cold War. The next week felt like I was living in a Truman Show remake, The Linda Show. She'd appear from behind her blinds every time I stepped outside. Her ancient poodle, Princess, whose gait resembled a rusty lawn mower, now needed walks 4 times a day, all of them conveniently past my unit. Violation notices began stacking up like fan mail from a deranged secret admirer. One cited my inappropriate plant containers, terracotta pots, apparently a crime against the HOA's approved aesthetic. Another was for creating visual pollution by placing a chair and small table on my patio. Because God forbid I sit. She even cited me for excessive patio usage. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was my patio that I paid for. Was I supposed to just look at it through a window like a condemned prisoner? The best part? She started CCing other residents on these ridiculous violation notices. I assume her logic was that public shaming would force me into submission. What it actually did was give me a brilliant gift, a growing list of people who were sick and tired of Linda's clipboard crusade. One of them was Mrs. Chun from Unit 12, who had been fined for owning unauthorized statuary, garden gnomes, to be precise. Then there was Dave from Unit 8, a guy with a Ford pickup that Linda considered visually aggressive, and Sarah from Unit 15, who got a warning for allowing her kids to laugh too loudly during recess. Yes, actual children, laughing, in a residential neighborhood. Turns out, Linda had built herself a quiet empire of control, intimidation, and completely fabricated violations. She didn't just dislike deviation from her aesthetic ideals, she declared war on it. And now, thanks to her own ego and my slightly vengeful organizational skills, I had allies. I had documents. I had witnesses. And oh boy, I had a plan. Remember that time I said Linda was getting bolder? Yeah, well, that was cute. Turns out, what I thought was her being extra was just Linda stretching before the main event. Because once she declared our Cold War official, the woman went full North Korean surveillance state. At first, it was subtle. Sort of. She started walking her ancient poodle, Princess, with uncanny timing. Always coincidentally, during my comings and goings. Princess, bless her dusty little soul, had a gait like molasses rolling uphill. But Linda? She was like a hawk in orthopedic sneakers, always managing to be within eyeshot when I so much as opened my door. Then came the mailbox standoffs. I'd walk out to grab my mail. There's Linda, checking the community bulletin board with a level of intensity normally reserved for Wall Street traders watching market crashes. Never mind that she'd just been there 10 minutes earlier. She'd give me this tight smile, one that said, "I'm watching you, you furniture-using criminal." But the piece de resistance? The photo ops. Linda started snapping pictures of my patio like she was hired by National Geographic to document the elusive millennial in his natural habitat. Not discreetly either. She'd stand at the edge of the common area, phone raised high, clicking away like she was catching Bigfoot on film. That week, I received 4 violation notices. 4. In 5 days. Violation number 1. Excessive patio furniture. I had a chair, a table, and a tiny planter with mint. Apparently, I was one throw pillow away from felony-level offenses. Violation number 2. Inappropriate plant containers. Linda apparently wanted HOA-approved pottery. My terracotta offended her delicate aesthetic. Violation number 3. Creating visual clutter. That's what she called a citronella candle and a coffee mug I forgot outside one evening. And the 4th? This one actually made me pause to admire the creativity. Violation number 4. Visual pollution due to non-conforming leisure activities. I wish I were kidding. It was because I had the nerve to read a book on my patio. That's when I knew. She wasn't even pretending to follow real rules anymore. She was just cobbling together HOA Mad Libs and printing them on official letterhead. So, I returned fire. First, I installed security cameras. High-res, motion-activated, legally mounted, and clearly within the HOA guidelines. Trust me, I triple-checked. They covered only my unit's entry and patio. But they did their job beautifully, capturing Linda's greatest hits in glorious 1080p. The first video? Linda crouching behind a bush to peek into my patio. Ma'am was doing full-on suburban espionage. I half expected her to pop out with camouflage face paint and a grappling hook. But it wasn't just about catching her in the act. No. I was playing the long game. I began logging every encounter, every note, every passive-aggressive glare at the mailbox. Dates, times, copies, photos. I had more documentation than the IRS during audit season. Then, the real game began, HOA meetings. Now, you've never truly seen panic until you show up to an HOA meeting with a manila folder labeled Exhibit A and a confident smile. It was a Tuesday evening. Linda was already seated at the head of the long table in the community clubhouse, surrounded by 3 other board members, 2 of whom looked like they were there for the free cookies. I walked in, all calm and pleasant, like I was just there to admire the wallpaper. Her eyes narrowed like she'd just seen a mouse in her pantry. "Mr. Henderson," she said in that saccharine tone she used for people she wanted to destroy. "How delightful that you've taken an interest in governance." "Oh, I'm very interested in seeing things operate by the book," I said, dropping my folder onto the table with a satisfying thump. The room went quiet. I introduced myself, then started asking questions. Friendly questions, of course. The kind that sound innocent, but feel like a scalpel dipped in lemon juice. Could you clarify the board's process for approving fines? Is there a central location where all HOA violation codes are posted for resident review? Has the board recently approved any amendments to the bylaws? Because some of the citations I've received don't seem to match the current language. Linda's smile wilted like a salad left in the sun. What really made her twitch, though, was when other residents started chiming in. Mrs. Chun, mild-mannered with a fiery glint in her eye, raised her hand. "I was fined for my garden gnomes, even though they're on my private lawn. Is that standard now?" Then Dave, our resident pickup truck philosopher, leaned back and drawled, "Are trucks against the HOA rules? Or just against Linda's religion?" By the end of the meeting, Linda looked like a Jenga tower one poke away from collapse. Her carefully constructed kingdom, one smug fine at a time, was beginning to tilt. She tried to regain ground with a speech about order and community values, but the crowd wasn't buying it. You could feel it shift. People were realizing they weren't alone in their frustration, and that, maybe, Linda's kingdom had fewer pillars than she liked to pretend. As the meeting wrapped, I stood and smiled. "Thanks for the transparency," I said. "I'm looking forward to attending more meetings. Might even run for a board seat next term." Linda's clipboard twitched in her hand like it wanted to leap up and slap me. Outside, as I walked back to my condo under the humming street lamps, I felt it. The change in the air. People were talking, comparing notes, realizing the emperor had no legal pants. Linda might have ruled this little cul-de-sac with an iron pen for 8 years, but the moment she turned her microscope on me, she triggered something she didn't expect. A millennial with internet access, a scanner, and way too much free time. And I was just getting started. Linda didn't take my sudden appearance at the HOA meeting very well, which, frankly, was the entire point. What I hadn't expected, though, was just how far she was willing to go once she felt her grip on power start to loosen. You know how some people try to dial things back when they're exposed? Yeah, not Linda. She doubled down like a gambler on a losing streak. And let me tell you, watching it unravel was both terrifying and oddly theatrical. If she'd channeled this level of commitment into literally anything else, she could have cured climate change. First came the flood of violation notices. Again, except now they arrived daily. Daily. My mailbox started to resemble one of those cursed horror movie props. Only instead of ghostly whispers, it just vomited paper like, "You are in violation of Code 7.6c. Improper placement of doormat." Yes, the doormat. A plain, beige, standard-sized mat with the word welcome. According to Linda, it was aggressively unaligned with the community's visual cohesion. The next day, a violation for excessive door usage. Apparently, I'd opened and closed my front door too many times. I don't even know what number constitutes excessive in Linda's universe, but I assume anything over 2 a day might send her into a mild aneurysm. Then came inappropriate footwear while on shared property. I wore running shoes to check the mail. I wish I were making any of this up. But no, Linda had moved beyond the realm of logic and deep into her own Twilight Zone HOA fantasy, where she was Judge Dredd with a filing cabinet. But her piece de resistance came when she turned her unhinged focus to my car. My humble Honda Civic, parked in my assigned space. My clearly marked, numbered, legally designated parking spot. The violation? Improper centering within assigned parking boundary. She included a photo, annotated with a ruler app, claiming my car was 3 inches closer to the right side of the space. It was the HOA version of a SWAT raid over a crooked picture frame. I ignored it, of course, which, in Linda logic, was an open declaration of war. So, I came home one afternoon to find a massive, neon orange violation sticker plastered across my windshield. Not tucked politely under a wiper. No, this was industrial adhesive, laminated aggression, designed to humiliate and ruin my visibility. Removing it was a nightmare. It left sticky residue that took half a bottle of Goo Gone and the better part of my Saturday to scrape off. That's when it stopped being funny. Linda wasn't just annoying. She wasn't just petty. She was a menace. But the moment it all crossed a line, the moment she went from cartoon villain to actual criminal, was that Tuesday night in March. I was home, headphones on, editing a video for work when I heard the faint sound of metal jingling. Then a soft click. I froze. My door handle was moving. Not knocking. Not scratching. Turning. I sprang up, yanked off my headphones, and tiptoed toward the door. My condo has a peephole, and through it, I saw her, Linda, standing outside my unit, with what looked suspiciously like a master key. She glanced around, clearly aware she was breaking about 17 different laws, and then, brace yourself, started to open my front door. I flung it open so fast she staggered back, looking like a kid caught reaching for cookies before dinner. Linda, I said, voice ice cold. What the hell do you think you're doing? Her expression ran through a full range of emotions. Shock, fake surprise, denial, defensiveness, all in about 2 seconds. Impressive, really. I received reports of unauthorized modifications to your unit, she said, holding up her clipboard like it was a search warrant signed by God. As HOA President, I'm authorized to conduct inspections. From inside my home. She blinked. Well, there's been water damage reported in the unit above. I needed to check for seepage. Cute theory. Except I live on the ground floor. Linda, I said, now holding my phone up, recording, say that again. Slowly. She flinched. You can't record me. I can when you're trying to break into my home. This isn't an inspection, it's breaking and entering. Which, last I checked, is a felony. She straightened her shoulders, clearly trying to reclaim some sense of dominance. I don't need to justify myself to you. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't object. Oh, I object, I said, calm but loud enough for the security camera to pick up every word. And I'm also pressing charges. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again like she was buffering. You can't threaten me. I'm the HOA President. I'm not threatening, I replied. I'm informing. You are not above the law, Linda. If you ever try something like this again, you won't just lose your clipboard, you'll lose your freedom. She stood there, clipboard clutched like a teddy bear, for one long, excruciating beat, before spinning around and marching away into the night. I watched her go, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with fury. I wasn't just angry on my behalf anymore. I was angry for every person she'd bullied, every parent she'd threatened, every dollar she'd stolen. She thought the clipboard made her invincible. It was time to show her what real power looked like. The day after Linda tried to Houdini her way into my condo, I brewed the strongest coffee my French press could handle and set out with a new mission. Find out just how deep her reign of clipboard-fueled terror went. Spoiler alert, it went deeper than I could have ever imagined. I started with the people she had already ticked off. Mrs. Chun from Unit 12 was more than happy to spill the HOA tea. Her garden gnomes? Confiscated while she was at work. Linda claimed they violated spiritual neutrality and shared sight lines. I'm not even sure what that means. Is a gnome more offensive than a badly trimmed hedge? Then there was Dave from Unit 8, who looked like he bench-pressed F-150s for fun. Linda had his truck towed once because it disrupted the neighborhood's ambience. Ambience. Lady, we live in condos, not the Versailles Gardens. But it was Sarah from Unit 15 who broke my heart. Single mom, 2 kids, probably already juggling more stress than 10 Lindas combined. She sat me down and told me Linda had called Child Protective Services on her. CPS. Because her kids were laughing too loudly in the common yard. I sat there, staring at Sarah while she told me how CPS showed up at her door, asked her if her kids were being neglected, if they had enough food, if she supervised them when they played. All because Linda didn't like the sound of children being happy. I could feel the rage bubbling in my chest like a kettle that had been left on too long. This wasn't just HOA nonsense anymore. This was calculated harassment. This was control by fear. I spent the next week collecting stories like a suburban Sherlock. I knocked on doors, asked the right questions, listened to long-suppressed rants over mugs of lukewarm tea. People were wary at first. Years under Linda's watch had left them nervous, cautious. But once I showed them the video of her trying to break into my place, their fear turned to anger. Turns out Linda's tactics were consistent. Harass the new families until they moved out. Find the young professionals for non-traditional decor. Accuse retirees of hoarding if they dared to leave 2 lawn chairs outside. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was engineering a community that fit her personal fantasy. Quiet, sterile, and utterly devoid of joy. That's when I decided to put it all together. I called it the Linda Files. A beautiful, damning binder filled with printed violation notices, mine and others. Photos of her snooping, stalking, snapping pictures from behind shrubbery. Witness statements from residents who had been targeted. Copies of HOA documents showing she fabricated rules. Screenshots of the fake citations with non-existent regulation numbers. But the piece de resistance? Bank statements. It turns out Linda had been collecting fines for violations that never got reported to the HOA treasurer. And because I'd managed to befriend George, an actual accountant on the board who was so sick of her micromanaging, he almost cried when I asked for help. He helped me access the official ledger. There was a discrepancy. A big one. Thousands of dollars in unaccounted for fine payments. At least $15,000 over 2 years. All processed by Linda. All off the books. Linda hadn't just gone mad with power. She'd gone full villain origin story. She was embezzling. Armed with this glorious, flaming pile of evidence, I did what Linda would have never expected. I organized a residents' meeting. Not an official HOA meeting. That would have required board approval, read Linda's personal blessing, and I wasn't in the business of seeking her divine permission. No, I reserved the community clubhouse for a concerned residents' social. Potluck included. Free cookies, the great uniters. I handed out flyers with no mention of Linda, just a little note. Concerned about HOA violations? Come chat. Turns out, if you feed people and mention injustice, they show up. 23 people. Out of 30 units. That's more than I ever saw at the HOA's annual budget review, which Linda once bragged about running, with clockwork efficiency. Translation. No one dared to question her, because she controlled the snacks. I stood at the front with my binder and a projector and said, I want to show you what's really been happening here. 10 minutes in, you could hear a pin drop. 15 minutes in, Mrs. Chun muttered, that witch is going down. 20 minutes in, Dave actually fist-pumped. The mood had shifted. I wasn't just some guy with a vendetta. I was the guy shining a light on a fungus that had festered for years. When I laid out the financial evidence, highlighted printouts, embezzlement totals, and the 2 sets of books, someone audibly gasped. Sarah stood up. What can we do about this? I smiled, probably way too smug for someone wearing jeans and a hoodie. We use the actual HOA rules, the real ones. Turns out, there was a clause in the HOA bylaws Linda hoped no one ever read. Board members can be removed by a vote of 51% of homeowners, with a valid petition. All I needed was 15 signatures. I got 18 by the time I left the clubhouse. Linda didn't know it yet, but her empire was starting to crumble. Her kingdom of made-up infractions, falsified fines, and clipboard coups was coming down. And I wasn't just going to end it. I was going to do it publicly, loudly, and legally. Once the petition was filed and the special election announced, I assumed, perhaps naively, that Linda would finally realize her dictatorship had reached its expiration date. Spoiler, she did not. In fact, Linda took the news like a disgraced monarch planning her last stand. If she could have barricaded herself in the clubhouse with sandbags and an army of clipboards, she would have. Instead, she waged a scorched earth campaign the likes of which only someone with far too much free time and a deeply misplaced sense of authority could muster. The morning after the election was announced, she was waiting by my car. Now, let me paint you a picture. I step outside, coffee in hand, keys jangling. It's a peaceful morning, birds chirping, distant lawn mower humming. And there she is, leaning on my Civic like she's auditioning for a soap opera confrontation. "You think you're very clever," she began, eyes narrow slits of contempt. "Well, I did find your secret budget, so, yeah, kind of," I said with the kind of smile that says I'm not afraid of your clipboard anymore, Karen. "You have no idea what you've started," she hissed, stepping closer. "I built this community." "Linda, you didn't build anything. You micromanaged a group of peaceful people into submission for nearly a decade and siphoned money in the process." Her jaw clenched so hard I thought she might bite through her own rage. "I will make your life miserable," she growled, completely dropping the act. "You'll be begging to move. I'll fine you every single day if I have to." And right there, in that heated moment, with her standing a little too close and practically foaming at the mouth, I pulled out my phone and hit stop recording. The expression on her face? Priceless. "You've been recording our conversation?" she stammered, color draining faster than a cheap spray tan in a thunderstorm. "Only the parts where you commit crimes or threaten to ruin my life?" I said brightly. Which, shocker, has been most of them lately. And just to sweeten the moment, I looked past her and waved at two neighbors, Mrs. Chun and George the accountant, who had witnessed the entire scene. Linda turned, saw them watching, and I swear if looks could kill, she would have burned a hole through the HOA sidewalk. She stormed off, but she didn't give up. Oh no, Linda had one more performance left in her. She sent out an email blast, a full-on manifesto, accusing me of leading a communist revolution against the values of Willowbrook Gardens. She called me a destabilizing force, which, honestly, I might get tattooed on my arm. She claimed the HOA was under attack from outsiders, even though I literally owned property in the community. She even attached blurry, zoomed-in photos of my patio furniture like they were security footage of a crime ring. And when that didn't sway people, she left violation notices on every single car in the parking lot. Everyone, including the mobility scooter belonging to Mr. Danvers, an 83-year-old who hadn't updated his driver's license since the Nixon administration. His offense? Non-standard vehicle alignment. I'm not sure what part of a mobility scooter could be misaligned, but Linda found a way. She even tried to launch a counterpetition to remove me from the community, which was both adorable and illegal. One brave neighbor actually responded to her with a handwritten note that said, "This isn't North Korea, Linda. Please relax." The final straw, though, the moment where even the people who once liked her turned, came when Linda took her surveillance to the next level. She started following me. To the grocery store. The gym. Once, I even caught her in the parking lot of my office building, sitting in her car with a pair of binoculars like a bootleg private investigator. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was the kind of behavior that gets you a restraining order in your own Dateline episode. And yet, it all led to the moment I'd been waiting for. The night before the special election. I came home late, arms full of groceries, and immediately noticed something was off. My patio gate was ajar. Not wide open, just slightly unlatched. The kind of open that says, someone was here and wanted you to know it. I stepped inside to find Linda Prescott, standing on my patio, holding one of my gardening tools like she was performing a forensic inspection. No clipboard this time. Just pure, unfiltered delusion. "I received complaints," she said, eyes darting, hands trembling. "You've got unauthorized tools, tools that violate section. Linda," I interrupted, setting the groceries down slowly. "What you're doing right now is trespassing. Again, I'm confiscating this," she muttered, holding up my trowel like it was a smoking gun. It's evidence of a violation. I pulled out my phone, already recording. You are in my enclosed, private space, going through my personal property, I said slowly. This is not inspection. This is burglary. For a second, I saw it hit her. The reality. The panic. Linda, I'm calling the police, I said, calmly, as she stood frozen on my patio like a Sims character who just lost all their pathfinding data. And for the first time since I met her, Linda looked afraid. Not annoyed. Not angry. Just plain scared. And as I dialed, I thought, this is it. This is how the tyrant falls. Not in glory, not in flames, but holding a stolen garden spade and surrounded by succulents. When the police arrived, it was like watching a Netflix crime doc in real time. 2 officers pulled up, cool, composed, and clearly trying to keep a straight face when I explained that the HOA president had broken into my patio to confiscate a trowel. Linda sat on the garden bench, back rigid, clutching my $7 gardening tool like it was a live grenade. Her expression was somewhere between indignation and, oh God, they're actually going to arrest me. Officer Martinez, the senior cop, walked over to me, notebook in hand. So let me get this straight, he said, eyebrow raised. You came home, found your HOA president trespassing on your patio, holding your tools, and claiming she had the right to take them? That's right. I nodded, phone still recording. She said it was evidence of a violation. And this isn't the first time she's done this. Check the flash drive I gave your partner. You'll find surveillance footage, violation notices, financial discrepancies, and a recording of her threatening to make my life hell. It's like a Lifetime movie, but with fewer commercial breaks. Officer Martinez gave me a long look, half impressed, half, what is my life? Then turned to Linda. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. You're being detained for trespassing, attempted theft, and possibly stalking, pending investigation. Linda's eyes widened. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. Ma'am, the officer deadpanned. You're not the president of the United States. Being HOA president doesn't exempt you from state law. They cuffed her, gently, but firmly, and led her to the squad car. Mrs. Chun, who'd wandered over with her tiny dog in tow, actually applauded. Dave from Unit 8 gave a celebratory fist pump. Sarah from Unit 15 stood frozen in place, her face a mix of shock and vindication. As the patrol car drove off, I looked around and realized this neighborhood had just collectively exhaled for the first time in years. The special election the next day? A formality. Linda was removed by a landslide, 28-2. The 2 votes for her were from her 2 elderly friends who didn't know she'd been arrested the night before. When someone explained, one of them actually demanded to change their vote. But justice didn't stop at a board reshuffle. 3 weeks later, the financial audit, initiated by George the accountant and executed by an actual firm, confirmed what I'd already discovered. Linda had skimmed over $15,000 from residents through fake violations and off-the-books fines. The police report? Brutal. Trespassing. Harassment. Fraud. Stalking. Tampering with private property. Attempted burglary. Misuse of HOA funds. If Linda had a bingo card of how to get arrested as a middle-aged bureaucrat, she would have blacked it out. The new HOA board, now composed of actual humans with a pulse and a sense of decency, did something miraculous. They refunded every fraudulent fine Linda had ever issued. Every single one, including mine. They also voted to eliminate subjective violation language from the bylaws and passed a motion to ban clipboards from meetings as a symbolic gesture. They called it the Prescott Protocol. I called it poetic justice. But it gets better. A local news outlet caught wind of the story. The headline? HOA president arrested for burglary and fraud. Neighborhood breathes sigh of relief. The article went viral. Other HOA-harassed communities across the state started using our case as a cautionary tale. Linda's name was now synonymous with suburban tyranny. And what about Linda? Well, after a brief stint in county holding, she pleaded guilty to several charges and was sentenced to probation, community service, and full restitution. She also had to attend conflict de-escalation training, which, in my opinion, should have included a lecture on not breaking into people's patios. She moved across town to a condo community that, fittingly, doesn't have an HOA. Rumor has it she tried to start one and was laughed out of the clubhouse within minutes. As for us, Willowbrook Gardens became pleasant. People smiled again. Kids played outside. Dave started parking his truck sideways for fun, just to make a point. Sarah's kids drew chalk art all over the sidewalk, and everyone admired it like it was the Louvre. Me? I kept my security cameras up, not because I expect another Linda, but because when you've been in the HOA trenches, you never fully put down your defenses. I also expanded my herb garden and added solar lights. Not because I needed them, just because I could. One afternoon, about 6 months after the Great HOA War, a young couple moved into Linda's old unit. They had 2 kids and a golden retriever. The wife, Jessica, walked over with a bottle of wine and introduced herself. "I heard the HOA used to be pretty strict here," she asked. I grinned. "Not anymore. We handled it." She looked relieved. "Good. My kids love being outside, and I really didn't want to deal with neighbors who hate kids." I glanced toward my thriving herb garden, now home to wind chimes, a small Buddha statue, and a patio chair with absolutely non-HOA approved floral cushions. "Jessica," I said, "you and your kids are going to love it here." Because in the end, Linda's desperate grab for control didn't preserve her vision of perfection. It shattered it. And what rose from the rubble wasn't chaos. It was a real community. The kind that comes together. The kind that laughs in the face of clipboards. The kind that says, "We live here too, and we won't be bullied." So if the next Linda ever comes knocking, I'll be waiting, with a camera, a copy of the bylaws, and one hell of a story to tell. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.